Hello, welcome to Capital Sensei. Today we're gonna dive into one of the most important books ever written about economics, a true game changer that shaped the world we live in. We're talking about An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, or as everyone calls it, The Wealth of Nations, by the one and only Adam Smith. We'll break down his revolutionary ideas, like the division of labor, the famous invisible hand, what really makes a country wealthy, and what the government should and shouldn't do in the economy. Whenever we can, we answer questions in the comments. Seriously, the comments section is where a lot of the magic happens. If you have a question, or if one of Smith's ideas reminds you of something you've seen in your own life or work, share it down below. Your stories and your doubts help everyone learn, and it creates a community of people trying to figure this stuff out together. So let's set the stage. Adam Smith published this massive book back in 1776. Yes, the same year the United States declared its independence. This is no coincidence. The world was buzzing with new ideas about freedom, rights, and how society should be organized. At the time, the dominant economic theory was something called mercantilism. Now, what on earth is mercantilism? Imagine you and your neighbors on a street all believe that the richest person is the one with the biggest pile of gold coins in their basement. So, you do everything you can to sell stuff to your neighbors, but you refuse to buy anything from them, because that would mean giving away some of your precious gold. You'd probably even ask the local authorities to put up a fence to stop your neighbors from selling their goods on your lawn. That, in a nutshell, was mercantilism. Countries believed that national wealth was a fixed pie, measured by the amount of gold and silver they had in their treasury. The goal was to export as much as possible and import as little as possible, using taxes, tariffs, and monopolies to achieve it. It was a zero-sum game. For me to win, you have to lose. Adam Smith looked at this and said, "You're all thinking about this completely wrong." He proposed a radical new idea. The wealth of a nation isn't its hoard of shiny metals. That's just a symptom, a consequence. The true wealth of a nation is the total sum of goods and services its people can produce and consume. It's the food on their tables, the clothes on their backs, the tools they use, the houses they live in. Wealth isn't a static pile of gold. It's a dynamic flow of production and trade. It's not a fixed pie to be fought over, but a pie that can grow, making everyone better off. So if wealth is about production, the next logical question is, how do we produce more? This brings us to the very first and perhaps most famous idea in the book, the division of labor. Smith starts with a simple, brilliant example, a pin factory. He observes that one single untrained worker trying to make a pin from scratch would be lucky to produce even one pin in a whole day. There are so many steps: drawing out the wire, straightening it, cutting it, pointing it, grinding the top for the head, making the head, putting the head on, and then packaging the pin. It's a lot for one person. But Smith says, what if you take 10 people and divide the labor? One person just draws the wire. A second person just straightens it. A third person just cuts it. A fourth just sharpens the point, and so on. Each worker becomes a specialist in one tiny part of the process. The result? Those 10 workers, instead of making maybe 10 pins a day combined, could now produce something like 48,000 pins in a single day. That's an astronomical increase in productivity. It's not just a little better, it's a completely different scale of production. Why does this work so well? Smith points to 3 reasons. First, the increase of dexterity. When you do one single task over and over again, you get incredibly good and fast at it. Think about a professional chef who can chop an onion in seconds, or a professional gamer whose fingers fly across the controller. It's muscle memory. Repetition builds mastery in that one specific skill. You're not fumbling around trying to remember the next step. Second, it saves time. A worker making a whole pin by themselves has to constantly switch tools, switch stations, and change their mindset. Moving from drawing wire to grinding a point takes time and mental effort. When you specialize, you stay put. You use the same tool in the same place all day long. All those little seconds and minutes saved by not switching tasks add up to a massive amount of extra production over the course of a day or a week. And third, and this is a really clever insight, the division of labor leads to innovation. When a person's entire job is to perform one simple, repetitive action, their mind naturally starts to think, there has to be an easier way to do this. They are the ones most likely to invent a machine or a new tool to make their specific job faster and more efficient. So specialization doesn't just make us better with our hands. It makes us smarter about the process. It's the very engine of technological advancement. This single idea explains everything from the factory assembly line to the complex global supply chains we rely on today. Okay, so we have all these specialists: the pin maker, the baker, the butcher, the brewer, all producing way more than they can consume themselves. The pin maker has thousands of pins but needs bread. The baker has hundreds of loaves but needs a beer. How do they coordinate? This leads us to the natural consequence of the division of labor: the market. People need to trade their surplus production to get the things they need. This propensity to truck, barter, and exchange, as Smith puts it, is what separates humans from animals. You don't see two dogs deliberately exchanging bones. But if you have millions of people all trying to trade with each other, it would be chaos, right? How does society figure out how much bread to bake? Or how many cars to build? Or how many software engineers to train? Who is in charge of all this? Smith's mind-blowing answer was nobody. And that's a good thing. This is where we get to his most famous metaphor: the invisible hand. Now, this is one of the most misunderstood concepts in all of economics. People think it's some kind of mystical, magical force that guarantees everything will be perfect. It's not. It's a metaphor for how individual self-interest, when channeled through a free and competitive market, can lead to positive outcomes for society as a whole, even if that's not what anyone intended. Let's use an analogy. Think of a busy city intersection without a traffic light, but one where every driver's only goal is to get to their destination safely and quickly. They aren't thinking about creating a smooth flow of traffic for the whole city. They are thinking about themselves. But in order to achieve their selfish goal of not crashing, they have to pay very close attention to the other drivers. They slow down, they yield, they cooperate. The result of all these individual, self-interested decisions is an orderly flow of traffic. That coordination is the invisible hand at work. In the economy, the baker doesn't bake bread because he has a deep altruistic love for his community. He bakes bread because he wants to earn a living to feed his own family. That's his self-interest. But to succeed, he has to produce good bread at a price people are willing to pay. If his bread is terrible or too expensive, people will buy from another baker. So his personal desire for profit forces him to serve the public's desire for good, affordable bread. As Smith famously wrote, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest." This self-interest, channeled by competition, creates a system that allocates resources with incredible efficiency. How? Through prices. Prices are the signals in this giant decentralized system. If a new health craze makes everyone want to eat avocados, demand skyrockets. Stores run out. The price of avocados goes up. What does this higher price signal to farmers? It screams, hey, you can make a lot of money growing avocados. So more farmers start planting avocado trees. After a few years, the supply of avocados increases, which then brings the price back down to a reasonable level. No government committee had to issue a decree saying, we must produce 7 million more avocados this year. The market, through the price signal, coordinated the actions of millions of consumers and thousands of farmers automatically. It's a beautifully elegant, self-regulating system. This is the power of the free market that Smith championed. He argued that when governments interfere too much by setting prices or granting monopolies, they mess up these signals and make everyone worse off. This logic naturally extends to trade between countries. Remember the mercantilists who wanted to block imports to hoard gold? Smith saw this as incredibly counterproductive. He argued for free trade. His logic is just the division of labor applied on a global scale. He used the concept we now call absolute advantage. Let's go back to our neighborhood analogy. Suppose you are an amazing gardener and your next-door neighbor is a world-class baker. You could try to bake your own bread, but it would be pretty average and take you all day. Your neighbor could try to grow his own tomatoes, but they'd be small and sad. The mercantilist solution is for both of you to struggle on your own to be self-sufficient. Smith's free trade solution is obvious. You should focus all your energy on your garden. He should focus all his energy on his bakery, and you should trade your amazing tomatoes for his delicious bread. The result? Both of you are far better off. You both have more and better food than you would have had otherwise. The total wealth of the neighborhood has increased. Now apply that to countries. Smith argued that if Scotland can produce great wool and France can produce great wine, they shouldn't be putting up tariffs and barriers to block each other's products. They should trade freely. Scotland gets better wine than it could ever make itself, and France gets better wool. Both nations become richer because their people have access to more and better goods. Trying to protect a domestic industry that is inefficient is, in Smith's view, like forcing a country to use a blunt tool when a sharp one is available. It just makes the whole country poorer by wasting resources. Now, because of all this talk about free markets and the invisible hand, a lot of people get the impression that Adam Smith was some kind of anarchist who wanted zero government. This is completely false. He was what we would call a classical liberal, and he saw a very clear and crucial role for the government, or what he called the sovereign. He just believed its role should be limited to a few specific, essential functions. He outlines 3 duties of government. The first duty is national defense. The government is responsible for protecting society from violence and invasion by other countries. This means maintaining a standing army or a military force. Without security from foreign threats, there can be no commerce, no property, and no prosperity. This is the most basic function of a state. The second duty is the administration of justice. The government must protect every member of society from the injustice or oppression of every other member. This means establishing a reliable system of courts, police, and laws. It means enforcing contracts, protecting private property, and punishing criminals. Think about it. Why would you invest your life savings to build a factory if someone could just burn it down or take it from you without any consequences? A predictable legal system is the bedrock upon which the entire market economy is built. It creates the trust and security necessary for people to invest and trade with each other. The third duty is a bit more nuanced. It's the duty of creating and maintaining certain public works and public institutions. What does he mean by this? He's talking about things that are highly beneficial to society as a whole, but which are unlikely to be profitable for any single individual or private company to provide. His main examples were things like roads, bridges, canals, and harbors. A good road network benefits every single producer and consumer in the country. But it's very difficult to make a profit from a road by charging every single person who uses it. The cost of setting up toll booths everywhere would be immense. So, because the private incentive isn't there, but the public benefit is huge, the government should step in and provide it. Interestingly, Smith also included education in this category. He worried that the division of labor, while making people more productive, could also make their work incredibly dull and mind-numbing. He feared that a man who spends his whole life performing a few simple operations would become as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. He believed that a basic education, provided or at least encouraged by the state, was essential to counteract this and to create capable citizens. So, the guy who championed the pin factory also saw its potential human cost. So, if the government is going to provide for defense, justice, and public works, it needs money, and that means taxes. Smith wasn't against taxes, he was against dumb taxes. He laid out 4 famous principles, or maxims, for what makes a good tax system. And these are still debated and used by policymakers today. First, the maxim of equality, or what we would call proportionality. People should contribute to the support of the government in proportion to their respective abilities. That is, in proportion to the revenue which they respectively enjoy under the protection of the state. In simple terms, the rich should pay more in taxes than the poor. Second, the maxim of certainty. The tax which each individual is bound to pay ought to be certain and not arbitrary. The time of payment, the manner of payment, the quantity to be paid ought all to be clear and plain to the contributor and to every other person. People should know what they owe and why. Uncertainty allows for corruption and discourages economic activity. Third, the maxim of convenience. Every tax ought to be levied at the time or in the manner in which it is most likely to be convenient for the contributor to pay it. For example, a tax on consumer goods is paid little by little as you buy things, which is more convenient than being hit with a giant bill once a year. And fourth, the maxim of economy. Every tax ought to be so contrived as both to take out and to keep out of the pockets of the people as little as possible over and above what it brings into the public treasury of the state. This means the tax shouldn't be expensive to collect. It also means it shouldn't be so high or so poorly designed that it destroys the industry it's taxing, or that it encourages widespread smuggling and evasion. A good tax is an efficient tax. When you put all these pieces together, you see a coherent and powerful vision for a prosperous society. It's a society where individuals are free to pursue their own economic interests, guided by market signals. This freedom, disciplined by competition, unleashes tremendous productivity through the division of labor. The resulting wealth, in the form of a vast array of goods and services, raises the standard of living for everyone, even the poorest members of society. In fact, Smith makes a point of saying that a common worker in a civilized and thriving country like 18th century Britain was better off and had more comforts than an African king who was the absolute master of 10,000 naked savages. The government's role is not to steer the ship, but to provide the safe harbor and the lighthouse. It ensures a level playing field through justice, protects the nation from storms with its military, and builds the docks and channels, the public works that allow all the commercial ships to flourish. It's a limited but absolutely vital role. It's truly incredible how much of our modern economic world is built on the foundations laid in this single book from over 240 years ago. The debates we have today about free trade versus protectionism are a direct echo of Smith's arguments against the mercantilists. When we discuss the proper level of taxation or government spending on infrastructure, we are working within the framework Smith established. The concept of the division of labor is the fundamental principle behind globalization and complex supply chains that bring us everything, from our smartphones to our morning coffee. Of course, the world has become vastly more complex than Smith could have ever imagined. He didn't foresee the rise of massive multinational corporations with more economic power than many countries. He didn't grapple with complex issues like environmental pollution, which are classic examples of what economists now call externalities, costs that are imposed on third parties not involved in a transaction. A factory might produce cheap steel, which is good for its owners and customers, but if it pollutes the river, it imposes a cost on everyone downstream. The invisible hand doesn't automatically solve problems like that. Modern economies also deal with challenges like managing the business cycle, the booms and busts, and providing social safety nets like unemployment insurance and public health care, which go far beyond what Smith envisioned for the state. But that doesn't make his work obsolete. It makes it foundational. You can't understand the debates of today without understanding the core principles he first articulated. He provided the essential vocabulary and the conceptual toolkit for thinking about economic prosperity. Reading The Wealth of Nations is like finding the original blueprint for the modern capitalist world. It's a detailed, insightful, and surprisingly readable account of how human nature and economic freedom can combine to create unprecedented prosperity. It shifted the goal of economics away from enriching the king's treasury to improving the lives of ordinary people. And that was, and still is, a truly revolutionary idea. He gave the world a new way to understand itself. And for any of us interested in how money works, how businesses thrive, and how our society functions, his insights are just as relevant and powerful today as they were in 1776.